Butte Choice Energy Authority meeting to order. And at this time, I guess we would do the Pledge of Allegiance for those in the room.
Want to do that?
So do you want to go ahead and lead that, Brian?
Sure, we can do that.
We don't have a flag in here.
Is there? We're looking for a flag in this room right now. There used to be one in here.
Oh, yeah, they're always.
I'd like to say I don't see much sense in this. I don't have a flag in the room that I'm in either.
Okay. As long as there isn't any issues with it, if everyone's in agreement. I'm fine.
Yeah, I think we're
Okay. All right, we'll move on to item number 2, public comment for items not on the agenda. This is reserved for persons wishing to provide comments to the board on any BCE-related matters that are not otherwise on this meeting agenda. Public comments on matters listed on the agenda shall be at the time the matter is called. Public comments from members of the public that are read at this meeting shall be limited to 300 words. Ashley, do we have any comments?
No, we do not.
Did we do roll
Okay.
call already?
Yeah, we were just gonna.
Actually, no, we didn't. Probably Ashley should do that. Sorry about that.
No, absolutely. I was just going to wait till after public comment. Director Brown?
Here.
Director Huber?
Here?
Director Teeter? Director Lucero?
Here.
Okay.
Okay. We're going to move on to the consent agenda. We have on the consent agenda the minutes from June 8th, 2020 board meeting, and the requested action is to approve the minutes from the June 8th, 2020 board meeting, and the acknowledgement of an inadvertent failure to comply with the Brown Act noticing and posting requirements regarding a board special meeting and cure. I would entertain a motion if everyone has read the minutes.
Move to approve consent agenda items.
Is there a second?
Second?
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, could we have a roll call vote, Ashley?
Absolutely.
And Ashley, could you note whether there were any written comments that were received on this item, on the consent calendar?
Yes, I will.
I'm sorry about that.
No problem. 1 second, just to triple check.
So we didn't have any public comment?
Just double checking here.
No public comment for the consent agenda. And we'll do roll call vote. Director Brown? Director Brown?
Aye.
Director Huber?
Aye.
Director Teeter? Director Lucero?
Aye.
Unanimously.
Okay. Moving on to the regular agenda, item A, operations and administration report from interim executive officers. We're going to receive updates on various operational and administrative activities and files with this report. And the topics include BCE financial update, an executive search update, public outreach and marketing RFP update, and a Cal CCA update. Brian, are you starting with this one?
I will do that. Yeah, so the first item here is our expense update here. So as you can see, if you're looking at it on the streaming or in your packet, our current expenses so far are $344,441, and they went up about $30,000 since the last time you saw that. And again, all of these are consultant costs and charges for labor for myself and for Eric with the city of Chico that will eventually be reimbursed to each organization. But those are the costs thus far for this project. I'm happy to answer any questions on those if there are any.
Okay.
All right.
Hearing none, want to move on to the next item?
You bet. So Next item is just an update on the executive search, and both the executive search item, actually these next three are they're updates, but I think when we get to item 4C, they'll make more sense because as you'll see on June 11th, the board interviewed 2 finalists, both of who were very well qualified, but we're recommending that the final selection basically be put on hold at this time until we have more clarity with regards to our launch date and getting our credit line in place. And again, more to come on that on item 4C. With the marketing RFP, again, the RFP was issued back in May, and we received 6 proposals. And similar to the executive search, we recommend putting this on a temporary hold until we have more clarity as well on our launch dates. All 6 folks who have submitted proposals have been told right now that we're waiting until we talk to the board this evening as to what the next steps are. But that's our recommendation, is to put those on hold as well. With regards to Cal CCA engagements, again, this organization is very helpful for us to stay in the mix on what's going on throughout the state. They have agreed to keep us on if we were going to be launching here in the spring of next year, our membership status would likely change, but they're willing to keep us on as a more of an affiliate membership fee for a much less cost, $1,500 a year. So that's good news for us. Again, this kind of ties to item 4C, should the board approve us delaying the potential launch. And I believe, I'm just looking at my notes here.
It says, Brian, that this was received as information and then recommended direction. Are you asking the board then to delay these 3 decisions until we have further clarification on the finances?
Yes. Item 4C, basically, one of the actions there is to, with regards to the delay, would be to basically effectuate all the changes and the mechanical issues associated with the delay, which would cover these items. So, yeah, unless there's any questions on these, I think when you get to 4C, it'll make more sense with regards to pushing these back. But I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay.
If there's any questions on our expenses so far, the executive search, marketing, or the Cal CCA engagement.
I do have a question on the executive search. Are both folks still in the running, or are because of the delay, has that changed their interest?
You know, we actually had one of the candidates dropped out, had accepted another position, so we have been in touch with one of the 2 finalists to keep them in the loop where we're at in the process. And frankly, if depending on how long of a delay we're in, you know, the market could change quite a bit, where the pool could completely change as well. But we are staying engaged with the one candidate who is still potentially interested in this.
Okay. Does anybody on the board have further questions about any of those items?
Not on 4B, no.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're on 4A right now, but it's item 1, 2, 3, and 4. So,
okay.
So this is really just received for information. So,
Gotcha.
Is there any public input on this 4A item?
No.
Ashley?
No, there has not been any
Okay.
public input on this.
Okay, then we're just going to go ahead and receive this for information if the board is okay and has no further questions, and we'll move on to regular agenda item B, which is the California Energy Market Update.
All right, and we're going to have Dennis Burnett, who is the president and CFO of Pilot Power Group, run through this presentation, and I'm just bringing it up now.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you once again for giving us the opportunity to speak with you today. I also have Craig Martin, who is our VP of Origination, and he is on the phone as well. So just, you know, if there's questions, either one of us can answer them for you. So, and Brian, let me know when your presentation's up and running.
Yeah, We're up and running, Dennis, and I apologize. There's a little bit of a delay here with YouTube, but I'll be sure to follow along with you. So we're on slide number 2 for energy overview.
Okay, perfect. So this is just sort of a overview of some of the procurement products that BCE is going to be required to serve your customers. And really, this is just an outline of the slide deck. So I don't want to go, into great detail here, but these are also the topics we're going to talk about, in the sense of settlement prices. I think it's an important conversation, which leads up to, I think, further conversations in the meeting this evening to give you some idea of what's happening in the marketplace. Next slide. So required procurement products, one of the key components, and it's the real sort of fundamental piece that, being able to supply your customers with various energy components. The base load and system energy, which consists of either block purchases, and this is generally from the wholesale market, or as well as shape purchases. And block purchases is something that is sort of like you'll buy, and I'm just sort of making up numbers here, but 100 megawatts of product, and that's basically, you saw it, and I think we're going to do an energy 101. So we'll sort of explain more of this at a future date, but a block tray really would be consisted of if you're purchasing 100 megawatts at a certain price. And then shape purchases, because customers are not, consistently using the same amount of energy over a 24-hour period, as well as a, 12-month period cycle. There may be high usage in the summer months, and then maybe lower usage during the winter or in the shoulder months, which is sort of, when you're, I guess, spring and fall periods, if you want to sort of look at a calendar from that perspective. And then there's day-ahead transactions. So when we basically will forecast what we think your customer is going to be using, and we go into the day-ahead market and submit bids into the day-ahead market. And then real-time, because we don't know exactly how much a customer is going to use at any given time, the imbalance or real-time market is sort of what trues that up. So if obviously we make assumptions on our forecast, but customers could, use more or less energy than what we're actually forecasting. Is the forecasting, as much as we like to make it as solid and perfect as we can, we would, it's a crystal ball in essence, trying to determine how much really a customer is going to use at any given hour or day. So that's the sort of primary piece of your energy procurement. Then we have resource adequacy, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about that. But this is, RA is to incentivize the siting and construction of new resources needed for future grid reliability. And there's 3 components to that. There's local, system, and flexible. And I'll go later in the presentation, I kind of go into more detail as to what each of those means. So next slide, please. And then there's the renewable, which is, one of the key things of why you are establishing CCA is to give your customers an opportunity to up the renewable content of their or their energy consumption. And the term that's used is PCC, or portfolio content category. So that's the definition of that. So PCC1, which is the most desirable but most expensive piece of your renewable program. You are required to purchase at least 75% of your portfolio, renewable portfolio, in PCC1, which consists of energy and renewable energy credits bundled together. So that is energy as well as the credits coming into the system, preferably in California, but you can import it in. But that's the 2 pieces together. And then renewable PCC2 can be 15 to 25% of your portfolio, depending, what your mix is going to be. And this is referred to as firm and shaped, or substituting electricity. And then finally, most CCAs try to avoid the PCC3, albeit you can purchase up to 10% of your portfolio in PCC3. And this is what is referred to as an unbundled REC. So it's in the PCC1, it's energy and rec, and this is just the energy, renewable energy credit. It's like a certificate basically saying the energy has gone somewhere else, but you get the certificate piece. And then on the right side, I've got sort of just examples of just how that makeup can look. So at the absolute bare minimum, your portfolio would be example 1, where you have 75% of PCC1, 15 of PCC2, and then 10% of PCC3. Now, you could opt to have 75% of PCC1 and 25% of PCC2, or again, have 90% PCC1 and 10% PCC2, or 100% PCC1. The combinations there are, sort of endless, I guess. But you do have that flexibility to bring your portfolio to a higher level if you choose to. Now, obviously, the cost structure, impacts it as well. Next slide, please. So I kind of want to talk about settlement pricing a little bit, and I'm going to use terms, and when we go through the procurement process, we're going to be referring things as to MP15, and I kind of want to get through a little bit of a definition of what we're referring to when we say that. So California is divided up into 3 regions or hubs. Pass 15, which is an 84-mile portion of the north-south power transmission corridor, and then North Pass 15, which is north of that corridor, NP15, South Pass, which is more of the San Diego area, San Diego, LA area, and then Pass 26, which actually connects PG&E to Edison hubs. And these are financial hubs where settlement is taking place. So in the next couple of slides, I'm going to show you sort of the forward curves of pricing at these. And when we price things, we generally price them at a NP15 or South Path 15, so on and so forth. So I just kind of want to define this for you before we kind of get into specifics to pricing in these various locations, and specifically North Path 15, because that's the region that you guys are in. Next slide.
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
This is Deborah.
Absolutely.
So, I'm just curious how the PG&E settlement has affected pricing, or if it has affected pricing in the NP15 region, or I'm not sure if that's what we're calling it, but it looks like that on the slide.
Regards to renewables or to actual energy? This is more energy related, so.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if, just because of the junk bond status that PG&E is in, does that affect its pricing at all, or will it?
No, because pricing is really, it's supply and demand. So as the demand for energy, the demand for energy hasn't changed because because PG&E's rating has changed. People don't consume less because PG&E's rating is, it's consumption and demand for energy in the marketplace will dictate the price for energy. So these different hubs are pretty much unrelated to what's going on with PG&E.
Okay, great.
Okay.
I'm just curious. Thank you.
No problem. Yep. So we're on the energy prices slide. So specifically talking about North Pass 15, and what I had done is, so we get forward pricing from Platts, which is probably one of the leading providers of pricing information. And what I had done is actually gone back, when I first pulled up this slide, or created this slide, which was July 8th, I looked at what the current forward curve was for North Path 15 on a calendar strip, and then comparing it to a year ago. So exact same day of the year, just a year apart from each other. And so you can see that a year ago, prices for, let's say, a calendar 21 period, these are average prices, on peak was $42.04. But just recently, several weeks ago, that forward price now is $38.72. And then going across, you can see that there's a calendar 22, so it's calendar 2022, and so on and so forth. And you can see that the delta or prices have fallen, I would say fairly significantly. I mean, you've got in the first, 2021, prices have fallen around $3, and then 2022, between sort of $5 and $6, and then in 2023, we're almost $6 to $9 difference between those curves. Now, this is a forward curve, and they can change, they change every single day, but it's quite dramatic. And the reason one could assume that this change is happening is because there's demand for energy right now is relatively low because of COVID. And I'll go into a conversation later in the discussion about some of the impacts of COVID on the market itself here in California. But that's a fairly significant drop. So if you go to the next slide, I've actually charted it, and this is NP15 on peak forward curve for those two time periods, and you can see the bluish line, which is the top line, is a year ago, and then the yellow line is just recently, a couple weeks ago, and you can see that's really almost a paradigm shift downwards, which is really great news. I mean, if we're going to go procure, prices are a little bit suppressed, so it's a good time to purchase. And then the next slide shows the change in the off-peak for MP15 as well. So I guess that's the good news story. Unfortunately, it's not all good news, because if you go to the next slide, we talk about renewable energy. So PCC1, again, this is the energy and REC together that's delivered to the California Balancing Authority. So prices, and the chart or the diagram on the right is, these are actually contracted prices. So these are actually been negotiated and contracted for. And you can see that PCC1, the price has dramatically increased over the years, and this is so for 2021, we're seeing on average around $17 per megawatt hour. And then PCC2, sorry.
Is there a reason for that?
I mean, demand is increased for renewable products, so you've got a lot of CCAs in the market procuring energy, so there has been an increased demand. There's also requirement by the PUC to basically increase your level of Category 1 or PCC1 renewable. So there's just more demand for it. Yeah, I would say that's probably the fundamental reason. Some could argue that because there's a lot of CCAs in the marketplace right now that they, could be driving up price a little bit, but I mean, demand is generally demand and supply type, scenario right now. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. PCC2, as I mentioned before, so this is procurement of energy that cannot be delivered to the California Balancing Authority, or CBA, without substituting electricity from another source. So not as desirable, but we are again seeing those prices increase fairly dramatically. I mean, $4 in 2018, now in around $18, and I've recently, albeit I've yet to see contracted, the prices are even higher than that right now. And Craig, you would probably be a little closer to this than I am, but you've seen prices greater than $8 right now.
Yeah, those prices, they've gone up to like 12. They accelerated past 10, even to $12 right now.
So yeah, It's gone up a fair amount. And then the next slide, we talk about resource adequacy. And so this is kind of, I think, the crux of our concerns, or some of the reasons why we're looking at the changes to the launch of the CTA. But and I've defined what each component is. Local is obviously really, local resources where supply is needed due to insufficient transmission to serve the entire load. Flexible procurement for flexible resources that can be ramped up or down on short notice to meet variable needs in the load. And then system procurement from system resources ensures that the resources will be available to serve the highest load demands when needed. So again, these are all average contracted prices. So local being, and unfortunately, BCE's territory is right in the heart of a really constrained region for renewables. And I kind of focused in specifically on your region on some of these prices. So we are seeing, on average $7.58, but again, up to $8 for resource adequacy. And then flex has been somewhat more level, but then I had some conversation with our procurement people, and they're saying that they're starting to see a very similar price for flex and system, which generally has a little bit more, has been a little bit lower price than the local piece. So this is, one of our biggest focal points for, launching of BCE in the coming year.
I have a question. This is Scott.
Hey, Scott.
When you say constrained, do you mean that there is an inadequate amount of already functioning sources?
So you're required to buy X amount of volume of local RA in your region. So Sierra is your region.
Yeah.
It is thought to believe that the utility, so PG in this case, is sort of holds the lion's share of that available resource.
Yeah.
And so you're out into the market having to try to procure it. When we go to launch, our plan is to work with, because PG&E has departing load, that we would work with them to try to procure that local RA from them directly, rather than going to the market and then competing with other CTAs who are also interested in this, specifically that region of RA.
Not quite sure I understand. I'm not quite sure I understand constrained.
Craig, do you want to?
Sure. Okay, so what happened 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, the CPUC, in conjunction with the California Energy Commission, decided to take what they call the PG&E Other territory for resource adequacy. So they basically had PG&E Other made up a whole pocket, right? So they had Greater Bay Area and then PG&E Other, and that PG&E Other basically took anything probably north of what we'll call Sausalito, all the way up to the north to the state line, and it went east all the way to the border of Nevada, and all the way back down where it touches, basically that state. So that pocket was one large pocket. Then what happens is the CPUC and the CEC, for any load-serving entity, right, they take all the allocations for any load-serving entity, which Butte County Energy would be. They take that and then they segregate and make allocations for that pocket. Well, subsequently, since then, the CPUC and CEC decided, we want to get more finite with this. So we're going to now break it up. We're going to break it up into basically 6 pockets. So basically now you've taken a Sierra pocket, a North Coast, North Bay pocket, you've taken Stockton, Sierra, and whatnot, and you've broken all those up into different pockets. Those allocations still have to be made for all those load-serving entities. So if for Butte County Energy, they've been assigned now a piece of Sierra. They've been assigned a piece. They've also been assigned a piece of Greater Bay Area, and they've been assigned a piece of Stockton. So full well knowing that your Greater Bay Area is nowhere near where your CCA is going to be, but yet you're going to be responsible for buying a piece of that. In conjunction, adversely, so are other CCAs and so are other load-serving entities going to be associated in a load ratio share, and however the PUC decides to come up with their framework, they then associate and allocate a piece of Sierra to all those other CCAs and other load-serving entities, such as PG&E and any direct access or what we'll call it ESP or energy service provider. That makes it a constrained area. So now what's happened is that Sierra pocket is not going to support everything that's in that pocket. That creates a scenario of being short. It also creates an area of being a lot more competitive. So prior to all this resource adequacy realignment, the CCA now has to go out and procure these pockets that are basically they're on the hook for. So what you end up with, you have more competition, you have less availability, which is going to drive the price up, if at all even available. So you follow me where I'm going on this? The thing is, now they've spread it all out.
Yeah, so let me ask you this. So does that situation create an opportunity, a better opportunity for developers who want to develop power sources within the Sierra zone?
Well, it develops not so much in the gas-fired area. So meaning basically it'll create renewable types of situations that will be able to be brought into that play. But no, it doesn't create more value for developers, because since California is going away from gas-fired and they're going more into renewables, right? And a lot of renewables now, especially solar, have now, when it comes to resource adequacy, have been derated. And the reason for the derating is because the gas-fired entities that are currently in play, meaning are on the ground, the steel that's in the ground, they want to be able to recoup from being there for a long, long time. And they have a right to, lobby for those situations. So it's a two-pronged attack. It's like the gas-fired wants availability, the renewable developers want in, but then the PUC and the CEC have to kind of balance this whole capacity market to ensure the reliability of the grid.
But at the same time, you're saying the supply is not adequate, so it's driving the pricing up. So it's the CPUC that is controlling that aspect by not allowing in more renewables?
I don't really think that it's the supply that's driving the price up. I really believe now that with the advent of so much more load-serving entities competing for the same thing, and the thing is, if the load-serving entity doesn't fulfill the requirement, then they're penalized, and they're going to do anything in their power not to be penalized. There's waivers, there's waiver abilities to go to the PUC, say we tried to find all this. But in the same token, certain entities, it doesn't matter if it's an energy service provider or whatnot, they'll pay more just so that they don't have to deal with the penalty or the potential for the penalty that's coming forth from the CPUC. So it's a two-way street. It actually creates a scenario where the competition and the supply and the rule, right, is driving the price up. So it's a three-pronged situation that's happening here.
It just seems like I don't understand, why anybody would get into a CCA then right now at this time.
Well, it's manageable, and so there's certain aspects of it, like we've suggested that when Butte County were to launch, we approach PG&E, who basically holds, we'll call it about probably a large percentage of the Sierra because of the generation that they hold within that pocket, to talk to PG&E to see if they will migrate that resource adequacy RA with that load coming over on a fair and equitable, transparent price. We haven't gotten there with them yet. That's a conversation to have down the road. Otherwise, what PG&E does, as any other load-serving entity like the IOUs do, once the load departs, or usually prior to the load departing, they will issue an RFO out to all the LSCs to, compete and get rid of all their RA that because they don't want to have it stranded. So it is manageable as long as you get out front of it communication-wise.
Right, and also I just think it's worth noting that there's other layers that we'll be talking about related to access to credit and timing, and also different utility territories within the state. So there are a number of overlays in addition to just actual market pricing right now.
How many CCAs are in the position that we're in right now, just trying to start up?
This is Sean Marshall. There are a small handful, one of which is very large, down in San Diego. At the moment, there's been one other in Southern California, a small one that has decided to delay. The others are pressing ahead in some ways because they have the advantage of having, their credit line in place. So
right.
they got to certain things a little quicker. But that doesn't mean that it isn't without its own set of challenges. But it is also different depending on where you're located. And none of them have this added issue of being in the Sierra load pocket with all the constraints they're in. So you guys are, you have a couple things, unfortunately, working against you at the moment.
And then if I could just, it doesn't sound like it's as easy or straightforward as this, but again, just to try to understand the question that Scott put to you. The constraint is the fact that PG&E is the biggest player in this area, but yet we have to purchase some of our stuff from the Bay Area, some from Sierra. It sounds like we have, certain rules that are guiding us as well. So we are constrained by not only PG&E being the biggest player, but also by these rules at this moment. Is that right?
Welcome to California and the regulatory environment when it comes to energy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why don't you keep going? Because I know there's several more slides to go on this one, and then it kind of leads into the next agenda item where we can get more into the weeds as well.
Hey Dennis,
Okay.
real quick, this is Brian. That's a quick question because I want to make sure I'm following some of the understanding here as well. So obviously this is due to a multitude of variables, this is not an ideal time with this particular area of the market. Now, have had other CCAs been in existence and they had built up that reserve and that rate stabilization fund, that's really what enables CCAs to be successful, correct? And this might be a question for Sean and Gary to chime in on, but I think those entities that have built up that stabilization fund, they're able to weather the storm for these things, whereas a startup doesn't have that stabilization fund, which again gets us kind of to the next agenda item. Is that logical?
Yes, to some degree if you're operational, but for those that are similarly situated to BCE in terms of startup, there are a couple of differences I've noted, one of which is their location. So that makes a difference in terms of certain market constraints. And also they have their credit line in place. And so that also allowed them to more quickly get into the market before, some of this is happening. Like I said, it doesn't mean that they're having a good time either. It's just that they have a little more flexibility because they had the money to be able to enter the market. And so that's why with BCE, it's good to be having this discussion about the energy markets and what's going on with RA, because that's the 900-pound gorilla. But that also has ancillary effects, as you guys know, on the credit markets, and COVID has not helped. So it's kind of multi-layered.
Gotcha. Thank you. We ready to move the next slide?
Yeah,
Yeah.
next slide. So the central procurement entity, which kind of is, I guess, being addressed and put in place to try to resolve some of these local constraint issues. And so what the CPE is where the IOUs will be responsible for purchasing the entire amount of the required local resources beginning in 2023 on behalf of all load-serving entities. So PG&E in this case would basically be the buyer for all local RA for the entire region for all LCs, which, as you know, a CCA is a load-serving entity. So this is a very much a departure from the current framework for ensuring local reliability. I think one of the issues is that it also limits the CCA to control the costs of goods sold for its customers. So, you know, this is where the utility is buying on your behalf, and then you become price takers with the utility. And, you know, you can kind of read into that statement because no one knows exactly. I mean, you're a price taker on, let's say, PCIA, for example, and this is another thing where you're taking it out of the control of the CCA, and now it's put in the hands of the utility, which I'm sure a lot of the CCA is having a little bit of angst on that. And then this is, sorry, a question?
I have a question on that. So that's the same for Southern California with Southern Sol Edison down there too?
Yeah, this would be across all of California.
Correct. And this is one of those new rules that you're talking about?
This is one of the new rules.
Right.
Just has come through.
Okay.
And then this would be also a shift in the local resource adequacy market, moving from a market of many buyers to one dominant purchaser, such as PG&E and Edison. And I should sort of correct what I said before. So Edison and PG&E are required to, or proposed to go through this CPE approach. San Diego Gas and Electric is not, because they feel that there is no constraints in that region. So they're kind of playing by a different set of rules. So it's specifically Edison and PG&E. And then the central procurement entity is allowed to procure on any associated services or flex RA capacity with mandatory allocations of the rights of LSCs without time to position their own portfolios. And then also it's a possible discouragement of investment in behind the meter resource options as well. So and this is again, very, very new in the industry. Everybody is having to sort of grapple with this and try to figure out how it impacts them. I know, you know, Cal CCA is very involved in positioning themselves on this, I guess is the best way to phrase it up. So this has been presented as sort of the answer to the local constraint issue. So again, it's very in its infancy stage, but these would be sort of highlighted comments about it. Craig, is there anything else you want to add to this?
No, that's it. That's well said.
And then kind of wanted to talk about some of the impacts of COVID on the market in California. So California ISO has curtailed renewable energy at record levels as solar power increasingly outpaces electricity demand. The ISO has load reductions we've seen load reductions of between 5 and 8% on the weekdays and from 1 to 5% on the weekends. As you would expect, there's a shift in demand from commercial, residential, and retail hubs to residential consumption. So as people are a lot of people are still working from home. You know, day consumption from a residential would be considerably higher than, let's say, commercial. And as commercial is starting to open up a little bit more in California, but, you know, there's been a lot of changes as to what the governor is doing regarding to manage this COVID event. So, I mean, I don't think we're sort of seeing the end of the changes in demand between commercial and against residential. COVID is not solely responsible for renewable curtailment, as curtailment has been rising every year due to the growth in the solar power. So I want to kind of caveat that. And then COVID-19 has impacted the renewable industry in California with an estimated of in excess of 35,000 jobs have been lost as of June 2020, and a deployment loss of 373 megawatt direct current in the second quarter of this past year. So there's a real reduction on what was forecast to be happening in California before COVID started. And then procurement of energy, renewables, and other related products is challenged due to credits, and that was sort of, Sean kind of alluded to the credit constraints right now and again, I think the credit markets are going to sort of open up as COVID hopefully sort of goes away, and people kind of get back to work and so on and so forth. But everybody's sort of at a very much wait and see type scenario right now. And again, later discussion, we are seeing just even suppliers being very, very tight on extending credit to you know, entities that have been around for many years. It's just everybody's just kind of as a wait and see right now because they just don't know what's going to happen over the next several months. So, and then last slide, I guess not last slide, but timing of procurement. So resource adequacy, and this kind of goes into a bit of a discussion as to why we're looking at maybe possibly changing the timing of the launch. So in October, you need to file with the PUC. 100% of your load commitment has to be procured, contracted by October of this year. So if we are going to launch this is procurement of the year ahead component, we would have to have that all taken care of by October of this year. And then in the forward, when you do the month ahead procurement, it's basically roughly 2 to 3 months before the flow month. So in this chart here, I've got the flow month being January. You would basically have it procured by October to have that filing. So this October filing would require that 100% of the local is procured for years 1 and 2, and then 50% of years 3, and system be procured 90% during the summer months, so May through September, and then flex be 90% of each month in the coming compliance year. So there's a lot of procurement needs to take place before the launch, which obviously it's difficult to supply, especially with RA. It's difficult to purchase this without having the credit support of your bank to be able to, you know, post a letter of credit. I just know, and I've worked with PG&E before, that if you actually procure anything from PG&E, you do have to post an LC for 20% of the value of the transaction. So all of the credit piece has to be in place well in advance before we go to procurement, which, you know, kind of, I think, dovetails into our discussion about timing. So that's all the slides I had. Talk about the market. I'm open for questions if you have anything.
Does the board have any further questions? I know I have a couple.
Sure.
So from the presentation, unless I'm missing something, it sounds like PG&E is going to be controlling our future. Whereas before, it was a little bit looser with CCAs, and we could pretty much guarantee, no matter how we cut it, that we could give our clients a 2% savings. But with everything the way it is right now, it seems that that would be a hard thing to guarantee.
I'm not, I mean, clearly a piece of what the CCA activities is going to be, you know, potentially controlled by the utility, and it's only a piece of it. There's other, you know, procurement components that you are out there buying: energy, renewables. The RA piece is just, I don't want to say it's a small piece. It's a fairly significant piece in the sense that it's not a it's a bit problematic in the sense of it due to the constraints. But it's only a piece of the portfolio that you would have to buy. So, I mean, there's, I think, clear opportunities to still bring value to your customers and still give that discount that you're looking for. And it's just, this just takes one more little piece off the table for the CCAs to be able to manage themselves. I don't think it's something that basically is sort of a go, no go type scenario, because, you know, local RA is a real, I don't want to say a small component, but it's relatively small in the big grant, the large, if you look at the pie of things, it's just only a small piece of that pie, because the energy component obviously is going to be the largest piece that you're going to be procuring. So, and that, you know, the utilities have no control over. That's what you're going to go to the market for and get from wholesalers and so on and so forth. So I think what we want to do, or what I'm trying to do today, is present to you, you know, this is what the market's at, and these are the challenges we have, and we're going to try to work through those challenges. But I don't think it's something that we've, you know, would say, oh, this is you know, this is a no-go, because I don't think we're there yet. So.
Okay. Do any other board members have any questions?
Nothing from me. Thank you for the presentation.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Dennis.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So let's see. I guess we're going to move into the next. Is there another slide PowerPoint show here on the next one? I'm trying to figure out which one we're on, Brian.
Yes, sorry. There's a delay, but we are moving to from item 4B to 4C. And you should see it momentarily.
So we're just receiving that presentation. Were there any comments from the public, or do we have any comments from the public on this item, Ashley?
No, we do not.
Okay. So we'll move on to 4C, which is approval to change launch date from April 2021 to be determined in 2022. And the requested action is to approve the change in BCEA launch timing and provide authorization to take necessary steps and file with the CPUC to effectuate the change.
Yeah, just a few comments on. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just a few comments on this item. Obviously, I think this item, having the presentation from Dennis, really, I think, spelled out most of the challenges that we're facing right now with resource adequacy, the rule changes. There's also a few unknowns with the PCIA costs. Again, that's the power charge and different adjustment that will be known in September. And just the impacts on COVID and the credit market right now, or all of these things right now are just I guess the best way is bad timing, for no better terms. So we are recommending that we delay things from April 2021 to a date to be determined in 2022. And I think there's a lot of things we need to do now. And again, we have the next steps there with regards to working out a change of the launch date with PG&E, with the PUC, and coordinating with PG&E. And I think it's our goal to really get at this again in the fall if the board were to make this approval. And so we have a better idea, and hopefully, again, as Dennis mentioned, hopefully the market will not be as tight. Hopefully the COVID pandemic will be more understood and more under control. But there are just a lot of unknowns right now, but the plan would be to get back at this in the fall and make sure we are on top of things to press forward as quickly as we can.
So I have a question. This one's for Gary, perhaps. If we were to postpone this, and which we're being asked to do, and if we had our financing in place in the next few months, if we're postponing, can we take advantage of the pricing now or not? Because I guess we couldn't buy anything until we're ready to launch, correct?
Yeah, in order to buy right now, I think you need to have a demand for the power, which means you have to have the launch date nailed down. And like Dennis said, you're going to need credit. You're going to need, several $1 million to take care of the credit requirements on RAs from PG&E, and of course we don't have that yet either. So I think, even though the market prices are down a little bit, the other variables that we've been talking about would preclude an early launch, like we had talked about earlier.
Okay. All right. Do any of the board members have any further questions about this particular item? Do we have any comments, Ashley?
No
from the
comments.
public?
No comments from the public.
Deborah, I do have a question.
Sure.
Or two. So in regards to costs, it's just wondering if we had already had our credit arranged, if we were already in the process, would we not be exposed to these cost increases that we're witnessing because we would already have contracted prices for the energy, and that therefore we would have kind of been safe from some of the price increases?
Dennis, why don't you take that one?
Sure. So those prices that I presented, or contracted prices that have happened in the past, you are purchasing pretty far forward. So those contracts were done probably a year ago. So, I mean, timing-wise, I don't know if renewables would have changed too much or not. I mean, again, if you had the credit facility in place sooner, or today, obviously the launch would not be potentially changing, and we would daily try to enter into various contracts. The one thing about credit, and I've worked with other CPAs on getting their credit facilities with their various bankers and such. It does take a couple months to kind of get everything, all the documentation, everything finalized, because it's a negotiation with your banker, and so that takes time. And so we're now at the end of July, soon to be August, and 2 months away. We're missing windows to be able to procure RA and such like that. So, I mean, I don't think you would have seen the lower prices if you had your credit agreement in place a couple months ago, but we definitely would have been able to take some of the advantage of some of the energy prices that we're seeing today.
So I'm just trying to put all this together in my mind. It seems to me that it would be safe to say that maybe it's a little bit of a blessing that we couldn't get the credit because the prices are so high right now. We'd be better off to wait anyway. Is that correct?
I would say that what is correct is trying to get past this COVID. And again, no one knows when this is all going to end, but I think there's going to be a little bit more clarity as to just from the marketplace and people kind of getting back to work. I mean, we can all hope that we're all sort of back fully engaged, by fourth quarter and definitely the new year. So things are starting to get a little bit back to normal, and as the market gets back to normal, credit becomes less frozen by various entities. The challenge that getting credit into place right now, I believe, is that any credit provider is going to be looking to BCE to be able to basically pony up more security to cover their position, and that's going to, I think, make a bit of a challenge for the CCA, to be able to go. And again, we closed a transaction prior to COVID with another CCA, and I think they were very fortunate enough to get a fairly sizable line with their credit provider. Both you and this other CCA are very similar size, and there was typical just sort of cash flow kind of covenants that were put into the agreement, where I think now, because there's just not a clarity as to how customers are going to pay or if they're paying, that just becomes, I think, a little bit more of a constraint, that where they're going to basically say, hey, look, we're looking for assurances, guarantees, whatever you want to call it, to be able to support the line that we're going to get. And
but if I understood the presentation correctly, COVID appears to have some impacts, but it's not. There are numerous other conditions that have conspired to drive prices up. So even if we had access to credit right now, it might not be the best time to be required to get into the market, because it seems like we're not going to be able to offer our customers decent prices as long as all these prices stay as high as they are.
And that's the exercise of going through the analysis on your performance statement to sort of do that assessment to make sure, hey, what are current prices doing? How does the pro forma or your financials look like, in 3 years, and determine, is this the best time or not?
Yeah, this is Gary again. Even before the credit situation was known, we were pumping the brakes on a start date just because of these other influences associated with the PCIA and the RAs. The finances were getting very, very tight.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Are there any more questions? I would entertain a motion to approve the change launch date if there are no more questions. Does anybody have any further questions?
No questions, but I'll move approval. This is Alice.
Okay.
Second.
And, okay, seconded by Scott. Been moved and seconded. Can you do a roll call, Ashley?
Yes. Director Brown?
Aye.
Director Huber?
Yes.
Director Teeter? Aye. Director Lucero?
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay. Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to D, which is adopt the BCEA fiscal year 2021 budget. The requested action is to adopt a resolution approving BCEA's fiscal year budget commencing July 1, 2020 to June 30, 2021. Are you doing the report on that, Brian?
Yes, I am. And briefly, what we have here in front of you is kind of it shows our revenues and expenses for this fiscal year through June 30th of 2020. Again, this accounts for both $300,000 influx in revenue from the city of Chico and the county, a $100,000 loan from Calpine. So our total revenues is $700,000, and you can see the expenses that we've done. I believe it's $349,000. which leaves us about $350,000. Now, again, these expenses that you see up here are primarily their consultants and obviously the bond with the PUC. We didn't factor in the costs from both Eric and myself and other staff, because that's not really a direct cost here that we're actually spending money on. It's time that will be reimbursed, but that you won't see that on this item. And then looking over it for, yes.
Is there a reason why, I guess my biggest question is, so if we're postponing this for a year, obviously that's going to have a budget impact, and it is going to impact us with having you and city staff, doing the work, because obviously you can't not do the work.
Yep.
So why aren't we showing that in the budget or projecting that?
It's just not a direct cost that's tapping into that $700,000 that's available in revenue. It is, you're absolutely right. It is time on my behalf and other staff's behalf and Eric and his staff, but it's not a direct draw on these revenues. We won't be reimbursed for our time until the launch of BCE. So it's just not drawing down on that $700,000.
Okay.
We do have a little footnote in there, so believe me, we're keeping track of all that, and that's why we want to make sure we continue to show that on our expenditure log that we share every month. But it's not drawing on that actual revenue.
Okay, and have you factored in how much what is the extra cost for spreading this out, over another year? What do you think the impact is going to be?
There's going to be, obviously, with the pushing it out. If we're able to launch in the spring of 2022, it pushes out some expenses. For example, obviously some things are going to be put on hold. The CEO recruitment could likely be put on hold until sometime in early, maybe first or second quarter 2020, probably second quarter 2022. But we'll have some time to make some decisions on those. But essentially, a lot of the work has been done. We have we have fantastic contractors in place, and ultimately some things are going to slow down here probably for a couple of months. Obviously, we're going to have some work to do to effectuate the change of the launch date with the PUC, and we'll make sure we get that done, because that's going to be the critical component going forward right now for the short term. And then in the long term, later on in this year, I think assessing the credit market and reassessing the pro forma data will be the next step, but that could happen a few months down the road. So our costs really should be minimal the next few months, I would say, and ultimately by not hiring additional staff at this point in time, our costs we can still maintain and get by on the initial revenues that we've committed to. So you can see we have about $350,000 to start this fiscal year. And in a perfect world, if the credit market, there's a lot of uncertainty, but if the credit market loosens up and we see some changes in the RA market, but we're able to get credit here, the idea is possibly not even have to use that whole entire $350,000 if we can get the credit line in place mid-year 2020, mid-year 2021. Maybe we can start tapping into that.
Okay.
So it does push some things back. It does push some things back, but at the same time, if we're not pressing forward with the launch, we're not expending some of these resources.
Okay, thank you. Does the board have any further questions on the budget?
Yes. So, legal services and consulting labor, are those contracts that we're in that we're obligated to regardless of what we do in the next 12 months, the next year?
No, both of those contracts are they're billed by the hour. So we put some estimates in there, and those are estimates for legal services and for our other contractors and consultants. But as I mentioned, we'll probably pump the brakes for there's some work that needs to be done immediately with the PUC and PG&E. But then after that, it'll likely be a little bit of a lull for a couple months at least, and then we start to assess our pro forma data again, and we want to get right back in that credit market. So again, that's a guesstimate right now of the $120,000, and we put $120,000 because that's what we have for them budgeted annually. If we don't use it all, again, it's not a guarantee that we have to use that. We're going to be as fiscally conservative as we possibly can, and only utilize our legal services and our consultants as we need to. but there's not a guarantee. I would anticipate we'd have some savings there in both of those.
Yeah, it just, the appearance is that, you know, if we're putting most things on hold essentially for a year, to spend $270,000 on those two items appears to be excessive anyway, in a period where we're just kind of in a holding pattern.
Well, by delaying, it doesn't mean, I guess, that we're going to have to get back. I think one thing that I think that Dennis had mentioned is, obviously, if the credit market is to change, we're going to want to get back into that probably very quickly there in 2021 or first or second quarter there. So time goes by pretty quickly here. So again, we're going to have to get back to work quickly. But I think the type of work changes a little bit. If we were launching in the spring of 2021, the work with our consultants would be significantly different, because a lot of our consultants that we have contracts with right now won't be doing as much work, because again, we're not going to be buying energy right now. We're not going to be setting up the data center. We're not going to be doing all the things that we have our other consultants lined up for. But we do have consultants on contract to help us continue to get forward as we need to. But again, it's not we're not paying a flat fee every month, and we will only utilize as necessary.
Right, and you might recall, this is Sean Marshall, Brian, when we were working on this, it might give you some comfort that these numbers, we needed to ground them in we had to have correct assumptions rather than sort of sticking your finger in the wind and a wild estimate. So these numbers are actually what's remaining in the contract. So there's some basis for why that is. But as Brian pointed out, it's unlikely that, especially in the next 4 months, you're not going to see much drawdown against those numbers. But, in the hopeful assumption that things improve here by the end of the year and we gear back up, then the first half of 2021, there's a fair bit of work to do. So, but that's the reason that those numbers are there. They represent what the contracts say, but it doesn't mean that we're going to use it all.
Right, Director Huber, this is Eric Gustafson too. Yeah, just to reaffirm that those are what existing contracts say not to exceed. That's listing those numbers in kind of a worst case scenario. But as Brian earlier mentioned,
right.
we'll be billing and utilizing those services on an as needed by the hour basis moving forward.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there any further questions? I would entertain, or do we have any public comments on this item, Ashley?
None received.
Thank you. I would entertain a motion to adopt the 2021 budget. Also moved. Second. Been moved and seconded. Ashley, could you do a roll call, please?
Director Brown?
Aye.
Director Huber?
Yes.
Director Teeter? Director Lucero?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay. Thank you. We will move on then to item E, which is adopt energy risk management policy and delegation of authority. Approve the resolution authorizing BCE's energy risk management policy and delegation of authority. Who's going to give us that report?
Yeah, and again, this actually was presented to the board back in its June meeting. And again, this is obviously the energy procurement isn't going to be happening as quickly as we had hoped for and planned for. And this policy can be, it can be a living document, but this is what was reviewed with the board at the last meeting, and there were no recommended changes to that document.
Okay. So I would, do we have any public comment on this item, Ashley?
No.
And any board comment? Okay, I would entertain a motion to adopt the energy risk policy and delegation of authority.
moved.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, I'll second that. Could you do a roll call, Ashley, please?
Director Brown,
Aye.
Director Huber,
Yes.
Director Teeter, Director Lucero.
Aye.
Motion passes
Okay.
unanimously.
Thank you. We'll move on to board member and staff announcements. Do we have anything? I guess the biggest curiosity is when we're going to meet again.
Yeah, and I think what I'd like to recommend we do is we keep the August meeting on calendar right now, and we'll let the board know as soon as possible. The only reason why I would keep it on calendar is if there's any updates that we have for your board with regards to our dialogue with the PUC and PG&E. But that would be the only activity that we have here in the immediate future. And if there's no need for one, I'll be sure to reach out to everybody to recommend that we cancel that meeting.
Okay, yeah, and I think it would be really interesting to get an update as to what's going on, because obviously we'll have more information about these CPUC rules and what's happening. And, you know, I think it would be interesting to know about the other CAs that are forming, you know, what's happening with them, and maybe get a report back on how these new rules are affecting these new CCAs and what's happening. I realize San Diego's a whole different thing, but others that might be similar to us.
Sure.
We can do that, no problem.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything for the